Being and Caring, A Psychology for Living by Victor Daniels and Laurence J. Horowitz, as read by The Happy President. Part 6, Living in Relationship. Chapter 25, Lasting Relationships. Just as chocolate syrup and spaghetti sauce are fine individually but less desirable when combined, you and I may be perfectly okay as individuals but have a hard time together. Or we may be all right in some areas of our relationship, but incompatible when we stumble into certain other areas. The behavior of a couple or a family is a system, not a simple sum of what its members do. In Gestalt language, the whole is different from the sum of its parts. Ludwig von Bertalanffy, among others, has worked on developing a body of ideas known as general system theory and applying it to the study of human behavior. The basic idea of a system is that each part is interrelated with all the others. When one person displays symptoms indicating that something is not quite right, it alerts us to look at the system as a whole. Indeed, family therapist Murray Bowen refuses to work with a single individual. When a family comes in saying, "The wife has a problem," or "Our son is having emotional difficulties," Bowen calls that person the identified patient, or IP. The family's message to the IP is, "If it weren't for you, the family would be okay." Bowen's reply is, "No, it's the whole system," and then proceeds directly to work with the total family to discover what's happening. A high proportion of hospitalized patients who have made progress fall right back into the old patterns when returned to their families. In the system's view, the entire family system needs help. In a couple, each partner tends to label the other the IP. "I'm all right, it's you who's crazy." Or if I'm obviously not all right, then it's you who's to blame for it. In its general form, the statement is, "If only you'd be different, we would be okay." Or, "I was all right until you came along." "I'm accusing you of doing it to me." "If you hadn't snapped at me for not helping you Friday night, then I would have been in a better mood Saturday." And you respond, "Well, if you'd learn to tell me how you're feeling, I'd be more likely to help you. But when you snap at me..." Each of us is good and right and justified, and the other is bad and wrong and unfair. It's a cycle with great energy. We can both end up feeling hurt, guilty, and estranged from each other when what we really want was to touch, be close, and let each other know we care. When I insist, "This isn't fair," and "You're doing it to me," I surrender my power and responsibility, making myself the helpless, righteous victim. When I realize that I make myself feel bad, I can learn to stop doing that and start learning to make myself feel good instead. In any social relationship, the kind of energy that evolves is the shared responsibility of everyone involved. The recognition and conscious use of the systems concept provides an effective way out of the blaming and disowning cycle. This involves 2 steps. 1. Remember and state the system's principle. "Wait a minute. On second thought, I guess I played as much a part in that as you did. After all, anything we do involves us both." Find words to say this that fit you. You are using this process to replace the "it's your fault" tape. 2. Learn to let go. Even though you've stated that your action was not the other's fault, you may still feel peeved at that person. You help yourself when you quit hanging on to it. Unclench your fists and jaw, let go of the tension in your body, and breathe deeply. If you still feel hurt about what happened, you can mention it on a non-blaming way. "The idea seems fine," you might object, but what about situations that really are unbalanced, where one person consistently victimizes the other? In fact, there is always collaboration. In order for one person to dominate or exploit the other, the latter must tolerate it. Both or all are getting something from what's happening and contribute in some way to keep it going. In my own life, in my cause-effect mode, I take the role of detective, judge, jury, and executioner, or exploited helpless victim. In the systems mode, you and I are mutual explorers, adventurers, and discoverers. Choose. Rules. At some point, each of us is new at being a spouse, mate, lover, parent, sibling, offspring, employee, or supervisor. Into these relationships, we bring rules to teach ourselves and others how to be. Rules involve expectations about others and scripts for ourselves. They define how we go about seeking satisfaction in our personal and work relationships. At home, our rules provide a relatively subtle statement of what kinds of responsibilities are assumed and assigned by whom and to whom. At work, the definitions of responsibilities and authority are typically clearer and more explicit. These rules may be called principles, guidelines, paradigms, models, or something else. You probably have your own word, but whatever I call them, they regulate how I can take care of myself and still be in a relationship with you. Some rules change and some don't. Some are more important and more strictly kept than others. Some rules are for all times, all places, all people, and some change depending on the situation. No screaming at the table is a rule until somebody spills hot soup in your lap. Most couples and families share some rules and differ in other rules. For instance, the Barton family rules. Dinner is at 6 sharp. Children must do chores after dinner. Mother makes the rules with Dad's help. If you must cry, cry in your room. No cartoons until rooms are clean. If you get angry, do so quietly. Don't scream. Cartwright family rules. Dinner is whenever it's ready. Everyone helps after dinner. Mother and Dad make the rules together and equally. If you cry, get help from someone else. Clean your rooms after cartoons. If you get angry, but don't hit anyone. What are the rules in your relationship of family? Can you make a list and talk about them with your partner or with other family members? We end up confused when we try to apply rules learned in the past to all situations in the present and future. When I stop to examine my rules, I need to look not only at who helped me make them, but also at where my rules need to change or be flexible. Are there rights of appeal? Are there clear rights of clarification? How do I make this statement that says, this rule worked fine when it was needed, but now it no longer functions and is getting in the way? Our rules cover what we should talk about and what we shouldn't, what we encourage and what we discourage. If one person doesn't follow the rules of the other people involved, others get frightened, upset, or angry. Sometimes the one who breaks some of the rules is the person who is showing the hurt and pain in the relationship. It happens when children act out the parts, feelings, and ideas that are hidden behind the masks of acceptable behavior that their parents have painstakingly constructed. Then parents get upset at their children for showing parts of themselves that they were supposed to hide. Some relationships and families have subcontracts, or rules we mustn't mention. A subcontract says people are not allowed to discuss the rules or a particular rule. It is an agreement not to deal with a particular area of relationship and not to mention that agreement. That lets us make an agreement and define some rules without ever having to take responsibility for doing so. For instance, parents may tacitly agree to ignore and deny the growing sexuality of their teenage children. They see a lot of what's going on, but without mentioning it, agree never to talk about it. Subcontracts interfere with our ability to clarify and fulfill our needs. They make it hard to talk about and change rules that need to be changed. We keep many of them outside our awareness. These are the ones most apt to cause us trouble. Another kind of subcontract states that expressing certain feelings is off limits. Yet another demands that one person be seen in a particular light. Lynn, for example, replaces the assertive solidity she shows in individual counseling with a weepy, pouty Lynn in counseling sessions that include her spouse. One way we can become aware of our subcontracts is through noticing our own and each other's double messages in which what we do expresses what we're not allowed to say. When Denise and Roger canceled their subcontract to avoid talking about changes in career needs and home expectations, their double messages diminished. Our rules can help us live comfortably and creatively with each other, if we use them consciously and flexibly rather than blindly and rigidly, so that we're using them rather than using us. Patterns. Knowing something about different patterns of involvement can help us understand our present ways of being and open up a larger horizon of possibilities. Categories of relationships. Lynch's penetrating analysis shows how certain ways of relating can be extremely frustrating to both partners, yet at the same time fulfill powerful needs. The categories of relationships described here are Lynch's, with our addition of acceptance relationships. Survival relationships exist when partners are emotionally debilitated and feel that they can't make it on their own. The choice of a partner can be indiscriminate. Anyone available will do. The union is a desperately clinging one, threatened by any signs of independence. To be in such a relationship doesn't mean I'm a defective person. I may be able and talented, but that I'm desperate for caring and contact. Validation relationships exist when one person seeks another's validation of his or her physical attractiveness, sexiness, intelligence, basic worth as a person, and so on. These relationships are appropriate among young people reaching for a sense of their identity. The packaging tends to be important: good looks, sharp clothes, nice car, or whatever is important in your crowd. These relationships are always a little insecure, says Lynch. One behavior can be everything, a source of tears and anguish despite everything else the partner has done all week. Expectancy relationships might also be called growing up together, or living without a script relationships. Lynch calls them building structure relationships. Partners seem just right for each other in terms of appearance, occupation, and family background. The choice of a partner based predominantly on an external definition of the perfect couple, however, is hazardous. These relationships tend to become either volatile, endless power struggles, or placid, superficial, and committed to the deadly ideal of always looking good while feeling nothing. They easily get stuck in old ruts rather than trying new possibilities. Acceptance relationships are what most of us traditionally thought we wanted and were getting into. A relationship where partners trust, enjoy, and support each other. Within safe limits, participants are themselves, and they restrain themselves from pushing those limits in ways that may threaten the other's trust, enjoyment, and support. Individuation assertion relationships involve acknowledgement and appreciation of each other's differences. Partners are flexible about who does what and actively encourage each other's growth, creativity, and personal interests and directions. There is probably a higher tolerance for risk and innovation and a greater willingness to test limits. By working at stating their own needs and hearing their partners, and at changing their behavior to more effectively provide or allow what the partner needs, couples in other forms of relationships can move into individuation assertion relationships or acceptance relationships. Commitments. The transient relationship in which we touch deeply yet expect never to meet again is an exception in a context of relationships that endure. But if we're afraid we'll lose our freedom or that the relationship will turn bad and we'll be stuck with it, we may hold back from committing to the extent that intimacy requires. From this ambivalence comes the tension of the come close, stay back dynamic that brings so much pain. Commitment is problematic when two people have different understandings of what they're committing themselves to. Some of it comes from conflicting fears and desires. When one side of a person says, "I willingly commit myself to," and another side says, "no dice," and sabotages the commitment the first side made. Commitments can be less frightening and easier to keep when both members of a couple explicitly talk through their fears about commitment and what they are and aren't willing to commit themselves to. Overloading. There was a farmer who hauled his produce to market with a horse and wagon. He kept loading more onto the wagon in order to carry the bigger load. One day, on his way to the market with a huge load of produce, his horse suddenly collapsed and died. And everyone wondered why the horse, which had been so reliable for so many years, should be suddenly overwhelmed by his task. Gestalt therapist Jerry Greenwald maintains that most personal relationships today are like the farmer with his horse. We pile on an ever-growing load of needs and wants, and then, when it collapses, question the value of any relationship. Today, the nuclear family, the parents or a single parent with a child or children, is called on to perform many of the functions that aunts and uncles, grandparents and neighbors, villagers and friends performed in the old days or in the old country when families stayed in the same place for generations and relatives lived nearby. This disintegration of the extended family has led us to develop community and government agencies to serve some of the functions it once served. With the withdrawal of government funding from some of these agencies, the pressure on the nuclear family has become even more intense. So it's important for people to look actively for resources outside their primary relationship in the form of friends, relatives, community services, church services, or whatever else is available, so they're not trying to do more than they can handle. The idea that any one person can fill all his or her partner's or children's emotional and intellectual needs is a big source of overloading. Each of us needs different kinds of relationships with people. Your own interpersonal politics with your partner can involve talking about how and when each of you feels overloaded and what you might do about it so that you aren't too burdened meeting basic needs to have time to enjoy yourself and each other. Roles. Different children in a family can have dissimilar personalities and play radically different roles in it. Clearly, no two children are born into the same family. There are differences in the relationship between the parents, as well as changes in age, health, economic circumstances, and parental attitudes and parenting skills. There are inborn differences in temperament that occur with each child, and differences in the mother's state of mind and hormonal balance while she is carrying each child. A major contribution to differences among children in a family lies in the varied roles they assume. Each new child, in finding a way to get affection and caring, or at least attention, finds or creates a role that's not already taken, or that can be filled by more than one person. In one family, for instance, a second sister, finding the good girl role monopolized by her older sister, might adopt a nuisance role to get attention. Another family might have room for two good girls. People in a family sometimes have nicknames that denote their roles. Some different nickname roles are wise guy, devil, brains, tattletale, judge, professor, tough guy, punk, angel, hero, policeman, lamb, dummy, princess, baby, loudmouth, and hermit, according to Alexander in 1982. What nickname role or roles, if any, do you or other people have in your family? This includes roles that could easily be given such a nickname, even though they weren't. Some roles feel good and some feel awful. They may change or remain the same. Sometimes even when a person or circumstance changes enough that the roles should change, others keep a person locked into an old role that no longer fits. That can be painful and frustrating, but even though the person is probably colluding with other families at least a little by staying in that role. Habits and patterns that suit who I am now take the place of old ones that no longer do. A woman who has always waited for men to ask her for a date, for instance, might start taking the initiative when she meets men she finds attractive. It can be very freeing to let go of stereotyped concepts of who has to do what. Recently, a storm was coming and, despite a terrible cold, I was all set to go out with a pick and shovel to clean out a clogged ditch. I certainly couldn't let my wife do that. Asserting herself, she let me know that she was tired of staying indoors with the kids and would much rather go out and do work with pick and shovel. And I was relieved that I could stay in the warm house and not exert myself outdoors. Sater's communication scripts. Sater describes 5 communication scripts she often sees people adopt. A placater sends the message, "Calm down, please don't get mad. Whatever you want is okay. As a placater, I speak in an ingratiating way, always agreeing, apologizing, and trying to please. My purpose in life is to keep the peace at any price. The basic blamer's message is, it's all your fault. If it weren't for you, everything would be all right. My blamer's voice is hard and tight, with clenched muscles, constricted sphincter, and a rigid stance. I stay in charge when I can keep you on the defensive. As a computer, I am total rationality. Betraying feeling is exactly that, a betrayal. He is calm, cool, and collected, writes Sater. When you are a computer, use the longest words possible. Your voice will naturally go dead as you are kept busy choosing the right words. After all, you should never make a mistake. As a distractor, I am adept at keeping people's attention away from any sensitive issue. Every response is off the point, going on in a different direction from what's happening, or perhaps in several directions at once. If I can keep myself moving fast enough, I won't notice what I'm not noticing. As a leveler, I state simply and directly what I want, feel, and think. I'm hoping for the clarity, trust, and intimacy that allows us to be available to attend, hear, and respond to each other. It's hard work and risky. So is peace. If I can recognize and honor these aspects of myself that I may dislike or feel embarrassed about, I become more sensitive to when one of them is taking over. I begin to be able to smile at and even enjoy these sides of me as I develop the ability to move in and out of them. Oops, there goes my placater again. Just listen to that eloquent sniveling. In addition, awareness and conscious control can lead to transformation in the forms patterns take. A blaming bitchiness that grew out of feeling exploited and powerless, for instance, can turn into effective assertion. Cantor and Lur's player parts. Sater identified scripts as she counseled troubled families. From their study of non-troubled families, Cantor and Lur in 1976 have identified inevitable roles that they call player parts, which are useful in observing what occurs in other social groups, as well as in the family. The mover initiates an action and establishes the context within which others respond. Other people in the system, the co-movers, determine who may and who may not succeed as a mover. In one family, the mother's need to exalt her boy child led her to disregard and treat as irrelevant the initiating efforts of her brighter girl child. The opposer challenges the mover. He or she may halt or redirect the action initiated by a mover. He may redirect and teach or may assault and maim. An opposer may reframe the meanings established by the movers, such as interpreting an act that the mover viewed as a gesture of affection as an attempt to control. A follower may support either the mover or the opposer. A follower can remain independent by shifting his or her allegiance, lose all autonomy by becoming completely allied with either the mover or opposer, or support each for different reasons. A bystander may silently witness what goes on, express his or her views privately, or express them in public in ways that do not involve taking sides. The mover, follower, opposer, and bystander are the family's four main player parts. Three important variations of these deserve special mention. The manifest mover is the key person who exercises power and determines decisions, even though others may appear to do so. This person may play any of the four parts to gather data before making a key, often well-timed, move. The pseudo-bystander is an opposer or follower who appears to be a bystander but who actually is playing an active part. The ideal co-mover moves, opposes, follows, or stands by, flexibly adopting whatever role is needed. Keyes states, "We open the doors of happiness when we let ourselves consciously enjoy playing the roles our life gives us in each moment." Marriage and related events. I am a firm believer that timing and being in the right place at the right time is more important than bells ringing and the earth moving. When he was ready to settle down, so was I. And so we did. Anonymous. Marriage is the hell of false expectations, where both partners, expecting to be loved, defined, and supported, abdicate responsibility for themselves and accuse the other of taking away freedom. Catherine Horowitz, 1972. The first time you buy a house, you see how pretty the paint is and buy it. The second time you look to see if the basement has termites. It's the same with men. Lupe Velez, 1977. Marriage, in addition to a relationship and a way of living together, is a public commitment to maintain a relationship for an indefinite time. It's a special and hopefully a beautiful event, a ceremonial transition to a new stage of life. It can also bring stress of a different kind that occurs in a relationship that either person can end at will. I may have to learn to make my peace with a disliked quality, live with a great deal of aggravation, or enlist my mate's help in dealing with discomfort. Some partners don't seem to fit together in their personal rhythms. Someone who meets the world in a slow, deliberate way, assimilating all the information about a matter and letting it percolate before taking action, may find it frustrating to live with a fast-moving, volatile person who acts impulsively and whose mind is in 3 places at once. Differences like that can seem exciting when people first meet, yet with time can create tension and lead to stress. If I try to change your rhythm and send critical messages, we may be headed for trouble. I can deal with such differences more effectively through acknowledging your tempo as yours. In a successful union, we continue to give each other quality time as we did in the beginning. Even so, in most cases, some of the time we used to spend with each other is now shared with work, relatives, friends, and other interests. When my wife and I were first married, we reserved 1 day each week to spend together in activities we both enjoyed, regardless of whatever else was going on. We put that time into our appointment book, and nothing else could touch it. When children came, our day evolved into family day. Later, as my wife began feeling overwhelmed with too much of being a housewife and homebody, we took half that day for me to look after the kids and her to have time alone. More recently, we've begun making more explicit time for dates alone with each other. At each stage, we negotiated the change. Giving and receiving. The following are 2 scenarios that, while they may appear a little overdrawn, are familiar to most of us. There's no hard data for the effects, just universal hunches. Julie wanted very much to have a child. When Wendy was born, Julie was generous with her milk, her holding and stroking, and her other ways of caring. Wendy grew and blossomed, and as she received Julie's nourishing care, she learned not only about receiving, but also about giving. Deborah thought she wanted a child, but really didn't. She was always busy with other things, even after Ginny was born. Ginny sensed her mother's distraction, and within the first few months of life, developed a basic mistrust. Many years later, Ginny is still haunted by a nagging fear that she won't get enough. She still has a hard time giving because she's afraid this would take away from the little she has, and a hard time receiving because she feels undeserving. One response to feeling the way Ginny does is to keep our distance from others. An alternative response is addiction to another person's emotional support. I depend on you to take care of my feelings and feel unable to depend on myself emotionally. Without you, I feel lost, frightened, or unhappy. An addictive relationship is inevitably ambivalent. If I'm preoccupied with getting all of my desires met, I may be somewhat inattentive to your wishes. In grasping desperately for what I need, I'm impervious to some of what you need. You probably resent that, even if you also love me. In my proclamations that I love you so much, the unspoken line is, as long as you're giving me what I want. Key's formula of learning to prefer the things we felt addicted to means learning to emotionally accept whatever is occurring in my life. I don't have to like it. I can still feel angry or unhappy about it, but I no longer live with my finger stuck on the emotional panic button. This means developing the emotional self-support of realizing that if I have to, I can make it through by myself even if I don't get all I want from you. By contrast, when I insist on finding everything within myself, I want to look at how I stop myself from obtaining outside support and at what I get out of doing it all by myself. In any important relationship, there are things I appreciate. If our relationship has any depth, there are also things I resent. In my uneasiness and my fear, I may convince myself that I have no resentments towards you. Actually, telling you my resentments is as much a gift as telling you my appreciations. Sharing these two kinds of feelings opens up communication and leads toward clarity, trust, and communion. If I'm not getting enough of what is essential to me, I'm apt to be greedy in other things, demanding more than I need or more than others want to give. I may be stingy, not giving what I could spare. Depending on what's being asked, and on my own energy and state of mind, giving anything at all can seem painful. By trying desperately to get, I may push others away and make it even harder for me to get what I need. When I feel too needy, too grabby, people can become frightened. At times like those, I may have to forgo my wants for a while and give the very thing I need to get. Giving it seems to open me to getting it. Once I was in agony over the crumbling of a love affair. I needed a lot of caring and comforting. A friend came in distraught about events in her life, in no position to listen to me. I pulled myself far enough out of my own pain to listen to her sorrow and frustration. When we'd finished talking, we felt a deep closeness with each other, and I realized that, in some strange way, she had also nourished me. If I think I have to give something in order to be liked, I'm apt to resent you and take away with one hand while I give with the other. I'm also apt to feel resentful when I accept something I don't want, especially if it seems to carry an obligation. I feel best when I take no more or less than what I want to take, and give no more or less than what I want to give. This Hasidic tale is a commentary on the act of overgiving. One day, an old, poor Jew lost his prized possession, his snuff box. Sadly walking in the forest, he saw a beautiful goat with long horns that swept the sky, clearly a holy goat. Gently, the goat asked him why he was so sad. On being told the reason, the goat invited him to take a piece of his horn and make himself a new snuff box. He did so and became a curiosity for all the villagers. Under duress, he told them where he got the material for the snuff box. One by one, they went to the goat and asked for and were given some of the goat's horn. Soon the horns were gone and could no longer sweep the sky so the stars could shine brightly. When you take and take, I may start feeling used. Then I need to take care of myself. At the least, I need to tell you how I feel and what I want in return. Sometimes it's only your appreciation, but I'd better tell you when I want more. And if I'm not hearing your appreciation and it's important to me, I can tell you that. On the other hand, my giving feels best to me when I can avoid getting locked into thinking, what do I get out of it? Or I'm afraid you're getting more than I am. Loving involves giving because I want to give. The measure you give is the measure you will receive, with something more besides, said Jesus. In such sharing of ourselves and what we have, my giving is receiving, and my receiving is giving. At such times, giving is communion. End of chapter 25.